But, you know, the average person thinks when Sherman came through, he was careless with fire and burned everything.
Burned everything.
Yeah, but not true.
Right.
And a lot of structures, there was more than 362 after the war, but by the time they were cataloged, probably in the early 1960s, and 362 is the number I remember.
Well, is this information where people can look at it?
Not really. They did a slide presentation. Two ladies here in town took all the photographs, and they're in a slide carousel. Matter of fact, it took 2 carousels to put all the slides in. And back, I guess, in the 70s, when I started teaching that Civil War class at Kennesaw, I invited these 2 ladies down, and they brought their slide presentation with them. And they showed slides or pictures of all the houses, and it was quite impressive what was left up here.
So is this in their possession, or is this in the Etowah Valley?
I need to check that. It was in their possession, but both of those, one of them is physically not available now.
Right.
And the other one is, but I haven't talked to her as in terms of, they need to be donated to either the History Museum or the Historical Society.
Right.
Things
yeah,
like,
they need to be out there. Everybody loves to see these old houses.
oh yeah, yeah.
And I know y'all put out a book, the Etowah Valley Historical Society, back in '85, I think it was.
Something like that,
Of
yeah.
some of the houses. I've got that book.
Yeah.
And
not all of them are, there are several mansions in there, but there's also several homes in there that just belong to, you know, people of modest means and all that.
right, but they had some sort of historical significance, or right. Yeah, it's a great book. It's a small book, but it's a great little book.
Well, I think they're going to republish that. They're out of copies. I've been back up here for about 22 years, and I lived up here one time before for about 5 years, but I really wasn't interested in local history at that point. And so when I came back up here, and that would have been '88, then I decided to do it right this time. And so I got busy and started researching the county's history, and it's really, this is just my opinion, but Bartow County probably has more history
Yes.
than about any 10 or 15 or even 20 counties you could
That is not just your opinion.
pluck
That's
off
a
the
lot
map
of
of
his
Georgia.
opinion. Yes, full of it.
And the other thing I was impressed with when I got serious was how many books were written about Bartow County,
Mm-hmm.
or by people from Bartow County who wrote books. And it seemed like there was over 30. And there's been some more books since then. Now there's a treasure trove of good information about Bartow County that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already been done.
Right.
It's just a matter of being able to locate the books. And the library has several of them. Etowah Valley Historical Society, we have our own collection of Bartow history books.
And people can come down there and look through these
Oh,
books,
yeah.
right?
Now the more valuable ones are behind glass, but you can still, they'll open it up for you, the glass cabinet. And I gave a little thought before I came out here tonight as to what we might talk about. I thought, well, you can pretty much subdivide Bartow County history into four different areas. One would be agriculture, and as late as the 1950s, that's what most people in this county were still involved in.
Yes.
So that's always played a big role. And then Bartow County is quite unique with all the mining that, not just presently, but in the history of the county, been an incredible amount of commercial mining with different minerals. And
Right. The ore, the manganese. limestone and the barite's and
Barite's, barite. What triggered it all off to begin with was the gold rush up in, people think Dahlonega, but actually they discovered gold about 20 miles north of Dahlonega, and there's a seam of gold that came right through what is now Lake Allatoona.
Right. This would be around the Sixes area, right?
Yeah,
a lot of it.
Oh, that's over in Cherokee County. Yeah, that was right in the path of it. And there were several gold mines, some of them reasonably productive, down in the southern part of the county. And then that vein of gold finally disappears over near Carrollton. So it goes above Dahlonega through southeastern Bartow County, and then continues in Cobb and Paulding.
We've heard of gold being found in Pumpkin Vine Creek and Raccoon Creek.
Yeah, that would be the right area. And then after the gold rush itself, that all the easy stuff was picked up within, say, from when first gold was discovered was 1829. By the end of the 1830s, it had pretty much run its course.
Pick lane.
Yeah. When I think of agriculture, actually cotton wasn't that great here until after the Civil War. Down in middle South Georgia, that was big, as in Gone to the Wind. But up in this area, it was mostly forage crops like hay and oats and clover and so on. But there was a cotton culture here after the Civil War. And I remember reading about a man out in Taylorsville. This was right after World War II, 1949, I think. He bought the first mechanical cotton picker. There's a world of people who are glad to see that, because I've never been anybody who said that was their favorite pastime, was pick cotton. But the thing that's always fascinated me about that mechanical cotton picker, for decades it really defied technology, applying technology to cotton production.
Yes.
And so it's kind of ironic that that we managed to invent an atomic bomb before we did a mechanical cotton picker.
Yes, it is. I've always heard the Taylorsville and Stylesboro area was probably some of the most fertile land in Bartow County.
Oh yeah, yeah, because you get you get the Allatoona mountain range, not big mountains, but it is a mountain range. And then as you get above Cartersville, the land's pretty hilly and stays that way. It's called the Piedmont Plateau until you get to the mountains of North Georgia. So the area in and around Taylorsville and Stylesboro, that's pretty flat. And when you drive out there nowadays, even today you see a lot of cotton fields out there.
Right.
And that is probably the most, at least it'd be my understanding, it'd be the most fertile part of the county. What really gave life to Bartow County was the W&A Railroad. Because when you think of it, it doesn't do any good to have a lot of land and raise a lot of crops unless you have a viable means to get them to a market.
That's right.
And it was the railroad that gave Bartow County not only a lease on life, but a new lease on life. So there was, right after the Civil War, there was a big move afoot to get a railroad from here to Rockmart. Then the idea was to continue it and hook up with the railroad over Alabama. So that railroad was finally built. I think it went Chapter 11 a time or two, but it was finally built.
Well, that was a lot of money to use back in those days, so.
Well, it was.
And I'm sure they ran over budget.
And people, that particular railroad, the W&A was reputable. This railroad, Rockmart, they used convict labor. That saves costs.
Yes.
And some politicians from the reconstructing governor on down was involved in it. Spelled out, that means sticky fingers. So they really did have their problems with that railroad for a number of reasons. But when you drive around Bartow County, anytime you're on a high elevation, you can see the big towers, Georgia Power.
Yes.
Out at Harley. And that wouldn't be out there if it wasn't for that railroad that went to Rockmart.
Yeah, that's right.
Because all the coal that, a lot of people still think that's, it's a coal-fired facility, and a lot of people think, well, maybe it's atomic. No, that's not here.
Right.
But in any event, they had to bring that coal all the way from Kentucky to Cartersville, and it's the railroad that determined where that facility would be built. Yes, I think that was probably the furthest thing from people's minds back in the 1870s and 80s, because all they want to do is give farmers an outlet for their produce and crops.
Right. Well, what about the mining in the area? There was a lot of mining. It started with the ore mining.
Yeah, there's. Now I've seen this in print, and I still fall for things. If it's in print, I assume it's true.
Don't assume it's true.
Yeah, don't assume it's true. But I've heard this over and over again. I've also read it, but it's not true. What I've read and what I've heard is that Bartow County has more commercial minerals than any county in the state. Cherokee has one more mineral than we do.
Oh, okay, so we're second.
Yeah, we're in the ballpark. And it's, I used to live down on Pumpkin Vine Creek. And back then I could walk, and my sons enjoyed tromping around. But David Archer, my attorney friend, he lives about 300 yards from where I used to live. And he's familiar with this. But during World War I, they had a shortage of graphite. So graphite is what you find in pencils.
Right.
And the ruins of big graphite operation are still down there. Just
oh, in that area there was a graphite?
Yeah, big operation.
Oh, okay. It's the first I've heard of that.
And manganese was big in its day. And there's still deposits of it here that if the demand ever got big again, that could be utilized.
And then limestone, it was heavy around Kingston area.
Yeah. Well, actually today, there's only 2 mining operations left in the county, you know, like Monday through Friday open for business. And one is New Riverside Ochre, and that's Mr. Dillinger's operation.
Yes.
And the other is this on Highway 20 out here, where they mine.
The Vulcan?
Yeah, the Vulcan.
I live right in that area.
And the dynamite head.
It's in my backyard. I hear it rumble every time they blast.
But they haven't knocked any of your windows out.
No, but it does kind of rattle things a little.
I bet it does. That was one of the reasons a lot of people didn't want it to come here.
Yeah.
Back then. But that's the only 2 operations. But amortized over the several decades, there were a lot of things mined here. Manganese was big, Baritees, Barite, oh, the list just goes on and on.
Right.
And there are several families here in town that came here as a result of the mining.
Well, it all started with Jacob Stroop, right?
I'm sorry?
Jacob Stroop coming
yeah.
here with the iron.
Yeah, he, you know, a lot of people who don't know all that much about the county's history, they go down to
Cooper's Furnace.
Cooper Furnace.
Yeah, they think that was it.
Yeah, they thought that was a one-shot deal.
Right.
But actually there was 6 furnaces just like that, and 5 of them are still out here. They're all out in remote areas of the county,
Right.
which is probably why they're still out here.
Yeah. They are looking rough though.
Oh yeah.
They're looking mighty bad. There's trees growing in them, and you know.
There's well, all of them are located on what is called the Neal property,
Yes, that's at Stamp Creek,
up on Stamp Creek. That's right.
or the Pine Long WMA.
The original Mr. Neal, he was an attorney for this mining company, and when they decided to wash their hands of Bartow County and move on, then he acquired, if my memory serves me right, in the neighborhood of 40,000 acres at a pittance.
Right.
Of course, it's valuable land now,
Mm-hmm.
but the Neal family still own and control that, and it's so that's where you find those furnaces. But when you drive around Bartow County, you see an awful lot of gashes in the earth where there's something that been mined at one time or another.
Right. I still remember where the old Kmart was, when all that was mines.
Yep.
Back in there.
Yeah, that was Mr. Dillinger's
Right.
ochre deposit back there. And I too remember that, before it all
Yeah,
became
before it all
commercial.
grew up, and they filled it in and started building on it.
That was a deposit of cement. And this is across, this is located about 2 miles from Kingston on Hall Station Road. And I guess about 1912, the cement business folded out there. They had basically depleted that pocket of cement. So you go out there today and there's still a couple of 2 big caves. You could drive a transfer truck into one of them. And those are all man-made caves. But in any event, that was the only cement operation in the entire South, at least south of Louisville, Kentucky. And it's for several years, several decades. And it was considered the highest quality of cement ever located in the United States at that time. For example, the East River Bridge over the Hudson River in New York City was partly made from cement Georgia. The Biltmore House in Asheville, North Carolina, they sold a lot of cement when they were constructing it from cement Georgia. And there were several bridges, for example, over the Tennessee River and elsewhere that used a cement from what we call Springbank. Would it be okay if I went ahead and talked a little bit about Springbank?
Oh yes, I'd love for you to.
My favorite spot in the county, and you and I are very lucky because you and I own it. It's called Springbank, and this is where those caves or caverns are located. And several years ago, when Roy Barnes was governor, they came up with this idea, and it passed the legislature to appropriate a good deal of money. This is back when the state had money, or seemed to have money. So they appropriated a good deal of money, and then they took all the counties in the Atlanta metro area, and Bartow County would be on the fringes, but we qualified. So based upon population of the county, you got X amount of money, the county did, to acquire what they call green space. And they had a public meeting up at the old library for people, citizens, to recommend what land to purchase. So I attended that meeting, and I recommended that if it could be purchased, the Springbank property, which at that time belonged to a timber company. Well, as it turned out, the timber company was facing hard times, and they agreed to sell it. So we got close to 40 acres up there, and it does not include the town of Cement. Actually, that's across the road, All Station Road, from Springbank. What made Springbank famous was that a man and his wife, his name was Charles Wallace Howard, came up from Savannah and purchased the property and then built a finishing school for young women. And now this was years before the Civil War, when they opened the school up. And what you have to appreciate is that before the Civil War, there were no public schools in Georgia. So if you wanted to go to school, you had to go to an academy. And every southern town seems to have an academy street. If you did a little research, you'd find out where the old academy once stood. And then after the war, then the state of Georgia began to build public schools. But in any event, that was the centerpiece of the Springbank property. There's a beautiful spring there. It was there, 150 years ago when Mr. Howard bought the property. And prior to that, I'm sure Indians, Native Americans used it. And it still gushes some of the purest water you'll find. I think the county should bottle that and sell it. But Springbank has an interesting history of its own. For example, Martha Berry and her two sisters went to school at Springbank. Kind of a feather in their cap.
Now the school is located across the road from Springbank.
If you drive up there, you go to Kingston, and at on 293, and then you drive just to the outskirts of Kingston, still on 293, and Hall Station Road dead ends into 293, so you take a right, and in about 2 miles you're there. And there's Barnsley Gardens has a hunting club that abuts the Springbank County property, and that's good, and because there's no subdivisions and no commercial activity back there. And the thing about green space, into perpetuity, forever and ever, you'll never have basketball courts out there, baseball diamonds. It's really a nature preserve. And that's, when the county bought it, they knew they could never use it for parks and recreation. So it's kind of for passive pleasure such as hiking and walking. And at the end of the trail back there is the ruins of an old grist mill. And it predated the Civil War. And if you should walk back there, the stones are, the foundation goes up maybe about 12 feet. They were put together with that cement from across the street. And that stuff is tough.
It's still there. There's a lot of it still in between the rocks.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of it missing, but there is still a good bit of it.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
And the Conosina Creek runs through it. And consequently they, as a matter of fact, one man got killed out there about 3 years ago.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was riding one of those four-wheelers or ATVs, and he and another guy were drunk and they were racing, and he lost control of his and hit a tree. And
this is just a spot to enjoy, to walk through, to enjoy the nature of the creek and the meal.
so actually the county wants, people who will respect the land to go out there and to use it. And it's worth your time to go out there and take a hike. By the way, the second largest white oak tree in the state of Georgia is about 60 yards from the springs. And it's a magnificent tree. So if you go out there, take your camera.
Yes, you'll want to take your camera for this place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's one other thing about Spring Bank. It's probably the most famous artist of the mid-19th century. His name is Everett Julio. And if the name doesn't ring a bell with you, if you've ever opened up a history book on the Civil War, there it is, the painting that he did. It's called The Last Meeting. And there's Robert E. Lee sitting on his horse, and facing him is Stonewall Jackson. And the reason it's called The Last Meeting is because Lee and Jackson were doing reconnaissance on the second day of the Battle of Chancellorsville. And it was getting dark, and they were discussing about picking up the battle on the next day. And then they left to go back to their respective campsites. And Stonewall Jackson's own men killed him. Inadvertently, they didn't mean to. It's the fog of war and what is called friendly fire, I guess.
Right.
But
he's actually buried up there on the property.
yes, he is. Julio, Everett Julio, the artist who painted that portrait. By the way, he painted two of them identical. And one of them is at the Confederate Museum in Richmond, Virginia. And as soon as you walk in the museum, there it is above your head. In other words, it's without a doubt the most famous painting of the Civil War era. And this artist, Julio, he was dying of consumption, what we call TB today. And he lived in New Orleans. Not a good place to live if you have tuberculosis. So somebody advised him to, of all things, to come to Kingston for his health. So he left New Orleans, came to Kingston, Georgia, did some inquiries, and ended up out at Spring Bank. Knocked on the door, introduced himself, and he stayed with the family and taught art at the school there, and then died several months later. And he's buried in the family cemetery, which is well maintained.
Yes.
The county takes real good care of that property. I'm so pleased that you and I got it and have access to it.
Well, there's a path right down through the middle of it, and on your left is the spring, and the swimming, what we call the swimming hole, and then to the right, out through there, you'll see the cemetery, and it's got a fence around it, and then if you keep walking straight, you eventually get to the old grist mill, and it's worth anybody's time to go out there and stroll through and look at it.
Oh yeah.
Just take anything that you take in there, take it back out. Leave nothing behind.
Yeah. She's talking about the swimming hole. The locals around Kingston, this is on Conosina Creek, the swimming hole, complete with a rope that you can swing out on and drop. And local people in Kingston call it Kingston Beach.
Well, it's dammed up a little bit. It's got a little tiny waterfall.
Yeah.
And but it's just an absolutely beautiful area.
Oh yeah.
I'm glad I'm glad they bought it. County
Oh
Road.
yeah. And by the way, that tree that I mentioned, I had a man with the forestry department, and it was his job to measure historic trees, and he measured that tree and estimated that it was at least 300 years old, and maybe 350. So it's that tree is a sight to behold.
We were there just the other day,
Mm-hmm.
and my husband took a picture of me standing in front of that tree. I look like a speck.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's huge. It's the biggest tree
Hard to
I've
get the
ever
whole
seen.
picture in the camera.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get the tree in the camera, but I just look like a little speck out there,
Yeah.
standing in front of it.
Now that tree is it's older than Bartow County. In other words, before white people ever came here, that tree was there. And if the tree could talk, it would take up at least another hour of radio time to the tales it could tell about Native Americans and early white settlement and so on.
Well, speaking of the Native Americans, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but you want to tell us a little bit about some of the early
Yeah, I'd
Indians
be
that
glad
was
to.
here?
You know, everybody in this area has either been to or they're familiar with the Etowah Indian Mounds. And if you look at the history of the county, in the 1700s, the Cherokees came into this area. And when they came here, those mounds had already been here a few hundred years. So people had inquired, did you build these mounds? The Cherokee said,
No.
we have no idea who built these mounds. So going back in time, you have the Cherokees, and we have no earthly idea what they called each other, but we call them the Etowah Indians, or the Etowah Mounds, only because it's adjacent to the Etowah River, which in the early days was called the Hightower River. But, you know, DeSoto came to Cartersville and was at the Mounds. And then later you had two other Spanish expeditions that came through here. And they had a historian with them taking notes. The interesting thing to me, not only about the mounds and the mound builders, but it's been proven that what is now Bartow County has had continual Indian habitation going back 10,000 years. So the Etowah Indians, they were the last kid on the block, except for the Cherokees who came after them. So you had just, and all of this is lost in the midst of time because there's no Rosetta Stone or any evidence except what they excavated from those mounds. In other words, nature has reclaimed all the previous Indian groups and organizations that have lived here. But we know they were here because the artifacts that we found that carbon date back 10,000 years. I recently attended a ceremony out on the Rockmart Highway at the edge of Cartersville. And before there was Etowah Mounds, there was an even larger mound complex. And we call those today the leak mounds, because the last family that owned them in historical times was the Leak family. When you ride around Cartersville, you see Leak Street, same family. But in any event, those mounds predated the Etowah mounds. You say, well, I drive by there, I never see any mounds. They're not there. The Georgia DOT, Department of Transportation, wanted to widen the Rockmart Highway, and those mounds were in the way. So they talked to Mrs. Leak. I guess she must have been a widow at that time. She said, I'll give you the right-of-way if you'll get rid of those hills out there.
Oh.
The hills, of course, she was talking about were mounds.
Right.
So the mounds were used as fill dirt for the Rockmart Highway.
Well, I'm sure she didn't have any clue what they were. They were just hills to her.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that's a shame. But they are digging out there and looking, right?
Oh, yeah, they've made several archaeological digs. They've also contaminated the site. Those big metal buildings out there. This is the, what is that word? Is it the Elks Club?
Yeah.
I think that's right.
I think so.
If you know where the Elks Club is, it's on your left, going outside of Cartersville.
Then it's back there.
Well, you'd start there and then walk back toward Cartersville in those fields. And what the city and maybe the county, I don't know, they have put a sidewalk, and it goes under the Rockmart Highway. And they've put excellent signs there. So the signs give you an awful lot of good information about the people who live there. Main thing to keep in mind is that they predated the Etowah Mounds.
We are out of time. Can you
Where you
believe
going?
that? I know it. I wish we could. We could spend several hours with you. We appreciate it.